Welcome. We're really excited to have you with us today for one of our Greenbuzz agency webinars. In such a time when things are kind of all over the place in the world, we're really thrilled to have you spend time with us for a strategic lunchtime discussion. My name is Tara Wilson-Jones. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Development at Greenbuzz, and I am joined today by some colleagues and friends of mine. I didn't tell them I was going to call them my friends, but they are. Rachel George, who's one of our producers here, and Amelia Oliver, who is our marketing specialist. And even more important than my wonderful colleagues, we are thrilled today to be joined for this fireside chat by an expert, an amazing mind in the social content space, who we're going to tell you a little bit more about as we go along. But before we jump into all the good stuff, Amelia is going to give us some tips on how to have the best webinar experience as a viewer. So Amelia, take it away.
Oh yeah, you know I love to give a good Zoom tip here. So if you are looking at your screen, we recommend hovering your mouse kind of over your screen, and you'll see at the top that you are viewing Greenbuzz Agency's screen, and next to that you'll see View Options. So click on View Options, and to the right of that you should be able to select side-by-side mode. That will let you see all of us panelists, and you can kind of toggle between that and view us in whatever size you want to see us. So that's how we recommend looking at it. But either way, you should be able to kind of adjust that bar so that you're able to see a mix of the slides and the panelists, so you have everything in front of you all at once. Feel free to shoot us a question in the chat if you have any difficulty with that. And bringing it back today to today's very special episode, we just wanted to give you guys a little bit of background about who we are and what we do in case you happened upon us and you're not quite sure what Greenbuzz Agency is. We are a full service video production company, and we're based in Washington, D.C. And we really specialize in brand advancement and messaging and storytelling through video. And throughout the pandemic, we've supported some really major video marketing campaign initiatives. And so we are always eager to find solutions for your marketing needs, especially as we get towards 2021. So if you're interested in talking to us more about that, drop us a line at info@greenbuzzagency.com to learn more. And going back to today's episode, today is actually our 20th webinar, and it's our last webinar of 2020. So if you'd like to check out any of our previous episodes and revisit some of the top line strategies we've covered throughout this crazy year, you can visit us at greenbuzzagency.com/blogs. And there you'll be able to see on-demand recordings for some amazing episodes, which include strategies from executives at Twitter, PBS, Make-A-Wish, NASCAR, Bustle, and many, many more. So throwing it back to you, Tara.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of amazing guests, but we're finishing 2020 out strong with one of the best minds today. If you were hoping to get some insights, some pro tips on future content creation for social and video storytelling, you've come to the right place. And the great news is, not only will you get a chance today in the structure of our webinar to hear directly some questions back and forth with Rachel, Amelia, and I with Greg, we will also spend about 40 minutes of our time kind of in that mode, and then 20 minutes at the end approximately answering your questions. So as we go along, as questions come up for you, please use the Q&A. We'll be monitoring those and moderating those at the end of the program so that we answer all your burning questions as well.
Finally, I am so excited to introduce our guest, Greg Galant. So Greg is the CEO and co-founder of the Shorty Awards, which is a prestigious award show that honors the best in social and digital media. This year's winners include Trevor Noah, Zendaya, Rebel Wilson, Megan Rapinoe, to name a few. Greg is a prominent speaker appearing at South by Southwest, Web Summit, and the Harvard Business School, and has been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and the Associated Press. So for those of you who are only partially familiar, the Shorty Awards honor the best content creators and producers in social media. So before we have Greg dive in, since we're talking about video, let's take a look at a Sizzle Reel that will give you an overview of the Shorties and help set the tone for the discussion.
The Shorty Award celebrates the best of short-form content created on a variety of social media platforms.
It's the only show that I know that awards people for doing social good on social media.
If you have a passion, follow it. It's never too late.
Kindness is everywhere. You just need to look around for it.
Oh, thank you.
I'd like to thank everybody else that was nominated for like losing.
Woo! It's come to this! My mom's probably flipping shit at home.
Oh, nice. Yeah!
One of the best things about social media is that it has the power to do tremendous good.
To every dark-skinned girl out there that has felt like they haven't had it in them, this one's for you.
Know your power.
Our teachers need to be armed with books and pencils and a proper salary and not firearms.
Imagine futures that nobody imagines for yourself.
If you feel like there's no place for you, there is. Keep going.
Well, I think that, people that indulge in narcissistic behavior of talking out into the internet need to be acknowledged for that.
An award like an Oscar or a Nobel Peace Prize. Better.
What an incredible room of people here celebrating a year of entertainment, education, activism, and creativity.
Many, many years ago, we could not connect to one another in the ways that we connect today.
We have to do this together.
Social media is what is shifting and dictating culture right now more than anything else.
Well, wow, Greg, talk about an impressive video and an amazing lineup of big names. I think for anyone who wasn't up to speed on Shorty Awards, they're pretty impressed at this point, not that we weren't already, but we've done all the talking. Let's hear from you. So can you tell us a little bit about what else don't we know about the Shorty Awards and what drove you to have this amazing foresight of a need and a space to create the Shorties and kind of have them accelerate over 12 years into what they are today?
Great. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on this webinar and for the really warm welcome. And I've long been an admirer of all the work Greenbuzz agency has done, and know you've all been very involved in the Shorties as both on the judging side and entering great work. So thanks again for being part of the community. In terms of where it came from, I kind of got into the social media world really early because first actually I started a podcast, which is why I have this mic, back in 2005 when podcasts were just getting going, and I was interviewing entrepreneurs. So I had Reid Hoffman on, the founder of LinkedIn, back when LinkedIn only had 50 employees and was just getting going, and the founder of Yelp as that was just starting, and ended up getting the founder of Brooklyn Brewery, founder of Vanguard Group, a whole bunch of other great entrepreneurs. One person who I had on the podcast, guy named Ev Williams. I interviewed him about this startup he had called Odeo, that itself was a podcasting company. Odeo didn't work. It was too early to podcasting, as was I, but I was kept in touch with him and I was following what he was up to. And then they decided to pivot to this little side project called Twitter. So that led me to sign up for Twitter way back in, it was probably like 2007. I just went for my first name. I got @Gregory because no one else had grabbed @Gregory yet. So I was on Twitter in those early days, and it struck me that Twitter was really different than all forms of social media before it. Before Twitter, you had MySpace and Facebook rolled out to colleges. I was in on Facebook early too, but you couldn't create content for people other than your friends back in those days. So Twitter was the first platform where there was this concept of like, hey, I'm going to make content that people who don't know me might want to consume. So that got me interested in Twitter in the early days. And then I realized like, hey, there's lots of people creating great stuff here, but there's no way to figure out if I'm interested in sports, if I'm interested in science, like how could I find some scientists to follow on here? So the original idea for the Shorty Awards, and this was in 2008, it was kind of a joke to start, was just to like build a site where people could vote for who they thought was the best on Twitter with a tweet by category. That was it. We built it in 2 weekends. We didn't have a venue booked. We didn't have a sponsor. It was just this kind of, let's see what happens. So we built it, put it out there, within 24 hours, it went so viral that no one had ever done viral voting before. Now everybody says, oh, please vote with a tweet, a social share. No one had done it prior to that. So it was kind of like letting the genie out of the bottle, and went viral within 24 hours. Shorty Awards was the top trending term on Twitter. And I had this kind of moment of panic because we didn't have a venue. We didn't have anything set up for this. And then I realized like, oh, people are going to actually want to come to this thing. We hadn't promised an actual event, but as the attention got there, we realized like this thing would, this was going to be something real. So we dropped everything and organized the first Shorty Awards all in 2 months because we didn't know any better. Now I would never think of organizing an event in 2 months, but we did it, and luckily it didn't end up. This was before Fire Festival, but luckily it didn't end up like the Fire Festival. And the first show was in Dumbo, Brooklyn. Before that was a cool neighborhood back in 2008, and already we'd outgrown the space. Even that first year, we were pretty much overflowing. And then realized like, hey, this is something we can keep growing. And we expanded it tremendously since then. Now Twitter is just a small part of the Shorties. And we both honor creators and influencers for the work they do. And then we also have a whole part for brands, agencies, organizations that are making social media content, as well as websites and using other digital storytelling methods to get the word out there. And it was prior to the pandemic, it was an 800-person award show right in Times Square, really big event, and live streamed out to over 100,000 people. And then ultimately the video ends up getting watched by millions every year.
That's really, I mean, not only incredible context, but I think that's just such an amazing origin story. And that's how a lot of the best content is created, with just playing and leaning into what sticks and really being an early adopter. And so I think kind of along those lines, what are some of the styles or approaches that you're seeing emerge, especially in this crazy year? And what styles do you recommend content creators lean into?
Yeah, it's really fascinating, like just seeing how much they always say like constraints are the, what you need to really be creative. And boy, have there been a lot of constraints this year. I mean, it's fascinating watching like in the early lockdown where you couldn't even get like an outdoor film crew together the way that you can now in most places, like seeing some creators where they would tell a story, except they would play every character in the story. Trying to remember her name, Mary something, who reenacted entire show tunes where she would play every character in the show tune and clearly be filming herself and cutting it together and reacting to herself. So, there have been these extreme forms of creativity, also watching people cut back and forth to each other. I mean, like we are now, right? We're making video, and you guys could always go back and cut this up however you want afterwards. So there's this element to which, like, I think everyone's kind of become a lot savvier with video, and even people before, like, I don't have a background in video myself. I used to not think about lighting and what it meant to like put my computer in front of my window so I get natural light to make it better, and think about, virtual backgrounds are all new. Sorry to give it away for anyone who thought I was actually in front of a authentic fire, but us thinking about our framing and what book's going to be behind us, or what we want to say about ourselves based on our background. So it's been been kind of a fascinating time to just watch this revolution where we're all, both professionals have had to figure out new ways to do things, but everyone's had to think about video.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you kind of touched on kind of one thing that I wanted to ask you, which is you talked about the logistical constraints, obviously, that have happened this year because of safety. But I was curious if 2020 has also changed or amplified styles of the actual story content that you're seeing. Because I know as a producer at Greenbuzz, we've had to obviously be aware of the logistical, but also there's a creative and story aspect where in any story that anyone's trying to tell, we want to be aware of the collective experience that we're all having with the pandemic and be sensitive to that. But there's also COVID fatigue, and that's not the only thing people want to be talking about. So have you kind of seen any shifts this year in how people are treating that?
Totally. Yeah. I think it's like I think you in your question you described the tension perfectly, which is like we have to acknowledge what we're all going through, but we also don't want to be too centered on it or have it define everything. And I don't know if you've had this sensation, but one way I love to unwind is with just watching old movies, or even, I mean, and old could mean 5 or 10 or 15 years even. And even just watching a movie from a couple of years ago, and then you see a bunch of people in a room together and you're like, what are these psychopaths doing? Not wearing masks and being in the room together. You're like, oh yeah, that was completely acceptable prior to February of this year. So it's like we can't even watch a movie made prior to this year without it feeling off or disconnected to us anymore, because it doesn't, understandably doesn't acknowledge COVID. So it didn't exist back then. So I think it's something we have to think about ourselves, aside from the fact that you'd be hard pressed to shoot a scene with 20 people in an enclosed area. Even if you did, it would be off-putting because it doesn't acknowledge the collective reality. Just like if you shot a movie of someone going through LA without hitting traffic in the middle of normal times, you'd be like, that doesn't feel authentic. So I think you have to acknowledge it to some degree to be authentic, but then at the same time, you don't necessarily need to make that the point of the story, because I think you're right. There is that issue of fatigue and people wanting to move on or have an escape or just be challenged and learn something new that doesn't center on that.
Yeah, so kind of going along with what you were talking about as far as, in this pandemic, people have become producers, editors, stars of their own show. We're curious to know, as far as, TikTok has had this extreme acceleration, for TikTok, for trends that we've seen develop in the pandemic, everything else. What do you think? We've seen different platforms boom and bust that seem like they're going to be the next best thing in social media. What do you think is going to stick around from this year, or what's something you're keeping your eye on as a tool for content creation that you think is going to be broadly adopted that isn't there yet? What should we be signing up for that we're not aware of yet?
That's a great question. I think it's a good point about TikTok. People are using, it's funny. Everyone thought like, oh, who's going to use their phone anymore now that we can be in front of our computers? The phone was just something to use when you were traveling. An iPhone, the pocket smart computer. And it turns out like, oh wait, the phone is actually seriously addictive and a great tool. Like the camera on the phone is still better than a webcam that comes with most computers, Macs included, as I'm sure you all well know. And the phone still has a certain power, the touchscreen fitting in your hand. So, I think one is it was like a reaffirmation of or just a reminder of how powerful the phone is, that it's no longer just your small screen from when you're away from your computer screen. It's maybe the most powerful tools we have, even if we are sitting at our computers. So, that's one thing I think is here to stay. I think Zoom is here to stay. A lot of people are like, oh yeah, Zoom, second, we're all fatigued on Zoom. The second we're done, the second we're all vaccinated, Zoom goes away. But I think people forget, you know what? It sucked being in traffic, going to a meeting, and it was hard. I mean, just think the production values we would need, or how hard it would have been if we wanted to do like a live stream in person in a studio. This webinar cost, I imagine, aside from your time, which is really valuable, but there was no hard production costs to this. Whereas, if we were to rent out a studio and have to employ camera people and all that jazz, this would be much more expensive. So I think a lot of this, the tools that we've used to make content digitally is going to be something where everyone's going to realize, like, wait, this is a whole lot easier. Like, yeah, we'll still do certain things in studios, and it's not to say that this is it, but I don't think we're giving up any of the tools that we've learned about throughout this period.
Yeah, and I think that really sets us up for the perfect segue. We're going to move towards the next section. So we're going to be talking about video storytelling. So I think that setup, talking about digital content and those tools, really is perfect. So for those audience members who don't know, Greenbuzz Agency was actually a Shorty Social Good finalist back in 2017. So we're going to start off this next section by playing a clip of a video that was a finalist, and then using that to kind of dive into this video storytelling discussion.
Hold on, that's broken. You don't want to use that. I'm taking care of you guys today. God bless you. You're welcome.
Is that gonna make you cry?
Fill My Basket is us paying it forward to complete strangers. Going to a grocery store and getting behind somebody, waiting for the bill, and paying it and walking away. Actually, I got this.
I got you today.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, have a blessed day, sir.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, I'm here to, yeah. I'm pretty nervous until right when we go.
Thank you so much.
When I shoot my first live video, it's kind of funny, I get my shakes off. We're ready to really rock and roll and help a lot of families out today.
Very first time we did it, I just sort of gave as much as I could.
And he was using his bonus that he had, and I had $65.
That felt good.
That's all that we've used of our own money. It's been all donations except for just that very first one.
You know, we have 5 kids and just trying to get by and take care of our kids. And thank you, it means a lot.
I pay for people's groceries all the time.
That's so sweet.
I've never had that happen to me.
Being able to inspire our community to do what we do daily, I think we're helping to make a big step for everyone around us.
I kind of want to do it now too.
Every bit counts. Even when we've been in line and someone's just getting a jug of milk's a huge thing, because that's all they can get.
One basket at a time, doesn't matter how big or small.
It's all about paying it forward. It's all about doing something for somebody else.
We're a family of 7. We've never been without the money to buy groceries or pay our bills, but things get tight. You really have no idea what today meant to us.
It's about other people seeing what we're doing and wanting to help somebody else. It's truly about starting a movement.
So Greenbuzz was very proud to submit that and to be acknowledged for the work done on that piece. And I think it gives us a great starting point to ask you, I think we all have instincts about what works and how you create connectivity through video. But can you talk to us about, with this video, with the other pieces that you guys award at the Shorties, what do you think makes this piece, those pieces resonate and kind of worthy of this Shorty finalist distinction and Shorty Awards? You guys are kind of a barometer, right? You're telling the world, like, this is what's working, what isn't. Tell us what the secret sauce is.
I think it was a very powerful video, and I think what makes it work, and I should just say as a disclaimer, we have a whole judging body that judges this, so I don't personally decide what becomes a finalist or what not. So, but I do get to talk to a lot of the judges and hear what they're thinking. So, I can speak in generalities about what makes videos successful. But see, this video, I mean, it's emotional. It feels real. It's clear that it was shot, in some kind of not with a professional video or not with a tremendous, large video setup, but with something that hidden camera of some ways, and is very relatable. We've all been in the checkout line, anyone who's had financial struggles knows what it feels like when that bill starts adding up. So I think, you could figure out what's going on. It felt like other videos you see on YouTube that feel like you could have shot them, or for parts of it feel like you could have maybe shot it yourself on a camera phone. Has that level of connection, and then it tells a story, and there are characters in it, and who you can relate to and can feel the up and down with. So I think it shows kind of the general, shift in what consumers looking for, in that they want, real stories they can connect with. They don't want just like, hey, buy our can of soup because it's better. It's tastier than our competitors' can of soup. They want a message. They want to feel connected to a larger mission. They want it to be emotional and connect with other people. And I think this video does that. There's also the moment of wondering, why aren't they wearing masks? And
yeah,
of course, it was filmed in 2017. There would have been no reason to wear masks there. But I think kind of joking about that, but I think there's a serious point in that this year we've been seeing this trend of social good. We launched the Shorties in 2008, but then we just launched the Shorties Social Good Award, Social Good Awards 5 years ago, because we saw the social good category was the most popular one in the main Shorty Awards. And we've seen this trend that consumers really care about that. Not only consumers, employees too. People don't even want to go work for a company that doesn't have a mission they believe in anymore. So, that's been a trend going on for a decade, for, even more so in the last 5 years. But I think this was the year that made a total turning point where we saw, I think, both people being isolated and having time for reflection, and then Black Lives Matter and all the protests, forced everyone to really confront these questions and focus on these kind of issues more than ever.
Sure. I know what I would say to this question, but I'm curious your thoughts on it. What do you think makes video specifically and video on social media such a strong vehicle for storytelling?
Yeah, we've seen, it's funny because we got to see the whole transformation when we started the Shorties in 2008. Like, you couldn't even post a picture to Twitter. You had to use twitpic.com to upload your image, then link to it from Twitter. And of course, you couldn't put video on there. And then Instagram came along, and Instagram just started with still filtered photos. There was no concept of video there. And then pretty quickly, videos come to dominate every form of social media. Snapchat first came out with the story, and I think we all realized how powerful the story was, since you could literally tell a story. A lot of people are like, oh, what is this? It's just 1 second. It's like, no, you could frame your shot. You could walk in somewhere. You can take somebody on your journey with you. And while the person's consuming it, they can skip along to the parts they want just by tapping. And of course, Instagram copied them. And now even Twitter and LinkedIn have stories. So it's just like the story has become ubiquitous. And I think the reason video is big is baked there in the name of the feature, the story, that it's the most powerful way to tell stories on social. It's something that they've made it so easy to create. You still have to be really talented to tell a good story using that video, but you don't need, it's not like how it used to be, where if you wanted to be a video storyteller, you had a huge learning curve and huge costs just to go out and buy a fancy camera and learn about, studios and lighting and fancy software to edit it. And now you can do it all within the social apps. You can, in essence, be editing your shots and thinking about how to do the light. I mean, the technology's come so far. So I think the reason video is big is it's all about the storytelling and the emotional connection you can create.
And as somebody who has your finger on the pulse of all of these social platforms at the moment, how much of video storytelling do you think should be really focused on the platform that you're concentrating on? I mean, I think that's something that we at Greenbuzz think a lot about, is really just making sure we're optimizing for whatever platform or channel we're going to be posting a video on. But I wonder, is it possible to go too far where you're thinking too much about the algorithm and what's going to sink in that side, as opposed to the actual real meat and storytelling angle?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a balance to be had. I mean, just to acknowledge the shift, though, I think we all come from a world, and there are agencies like yours that kind of grew up on digital and probably don't have this this baggage. But in the traditional entertainment industry, there is such a concept that, like, we're going to go off, like you look at the studio system, it's like, we're going to make the movie. And then once we're done making the movie, we're going to pass it to a whole other department that we're never going to interact with. We probably don't even know who works there. And they're going to figure out how to distribute it and how to market it. And then the people who are the marketers and distributors, they had no say in, what the movie, how the movie was shot, or what the plot was, or who was in it, or any of that. And I think the web flipped it, where you have to think how, the distribution kind of dictates the content. Like if you want to release something as an Instagram story, you can't shoot it as a movie. You have to think, okay, well, now it's vertical video, and there has to be, it's got to be broken up into 15-second segments, and kind of work in that aesthetic. But if you want to release it on TikTok, the constraints are different. And if you want it to be a YouTube video, the constraints are different again. Now you're at horizontal again, and potentially a lot longer form. So we have to acknowledge we are in this world where the platforms are, in essence, your distribution mechanisms, and they dictate the content. So we have to acknowledge that order of it, but at the same time, we can't lose sight of the storytelling, because you could be perfectly great at optimizing all that and then have a lame story, and then all this work you do on the distribution doesn't matter. So at the end of the day, it's like you just have to get both right, and you got to make sure that one side doesn't blind you to the other.
Yes, sort of along those lines. I mean, you talked about how social videos kind of reinforce this evolution of our society to pay attention and amplify stories of social investment, social good, all those pieces, which obviously brands that do well with causes do better with their, customers and also their employees. 5-10 years ago, the role of social media in a business model for marketing, that keeps evolving. But for anyone out there who still needs to be convinced, what's your best business pitch that says, like, here's the thing, you may not get it, you may not understand on your phone. I mean, even my dad uses social media kind of now, but I mean, for executives who are kind of longer in their careers, who still need to be convinced, what's your best business argument for, video is a thing you need to do for everyone who's listening, who's trying to convince their boss, come on, let's put a little time and money into this. What's your best kind of business argument from what you've seen on the front lines over the last 12 years?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is stats can be really powerful. You have to go where the audience is, and you can now show huge numbers for these platforms. Another is, I think nowadays with, because everyone's like having to use digital so much in web video, you probably have an advantage. The executives are, they're not flying off to their conferences anymore. They're stuck at home like the rest of us using content. Now, there might be try to get them too addicted to the platform you need to get them on. So if you want to convince them to do the TikTok campaign, figure out if maybe the executives into golf, find the TikTok golf people, start sending those videos to that executive, and wait till they get into it, and then figure out how to pull them in. Because I think you make a good point. People don't. It's like the people out to experiencing it themselves. It reminds me, like with my, I founded another business called Muckrack that's a PR software business. And I'd hear all these stories like back when BuzzFeed was at its height, there were still executives, they'd get some article placed in BuzzFeed and there's still some executives who'd never heard of BuzzFeed. So it's like one of these awful things where like, you've scored this huge win for your company. And meanwhile, your executive's like, what's BuzzFeed? So it's that same kind of, dynamic here, I think, where you might do an awesome job building up this channel on a social platform that an executive doesn't get yet. And until you get so some executives are smart and they'll be like, okay, well, I don't get it, but I can look at the numbers and understand if this platform has 200 million users and it aligns well with our audience, like just because I don't use it doesn't mean our audience doesn't. But for the other ones, I think you got to get them into it. And you know what? Maybe even engage their family. Like I would see it a lot at the Shorty Awards where we would get a lot of, middle-aged executives coming to the Shorty Awards. And instead of bringing their spouse, they'd bring their children. And their children would explain to them, like we'd have MKBHD on screen or Casey Neistat, people like that, Tyler Oakley. And they'd never heard of these people, but then they see their kid would be like just starstruck and explain to them like what a big deal that creator is. And then, they felt cool in front of their kids and all that. So, you got to be creative sometimes and figuring out like, how do you tell the story of why this platform matters to someone who's not in the natural demographic for it.
That's awesome that they bring their kids kind of as a helpful interpreter for maybe the new type of video platforms and so on. On that kind of note, I was curious. I know that there are things that we say with social media in general, you need to try to keep people's attention. There are certain like overarching rules, but I also think that there are enough different platforms that are doing video differently that you specifically tailor things to platforms. Like when you go to TikTok, you expect a style of video that's different than if you're going to Instagram stories, if you're going to Facebook or things like that. Do you feel that with all these different kinds of platforms that there are still overarching rules for success on the web in general, or do you feel like it really is more of a case-by-case basis now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's definitely like I think there's two levels to it. The rules of storytelling are universal with having empathetic characters and, an arc being relatable, kind of finding some ways to wrap like a hero's journey into the story. Like that's all universal. But then in terms of like how you format it for every platform, like the rules change, just like, movies, the rules change before they were sound in movies to after they were sound in movies. Like you had to change how you made the story. You still had to have a relatable character, but the craft changes. What's different though for us is the craft changes a lot faster than it did for movies, right? Movies, you added sound, you added color. That's pretty much it. CGI eventually came along and things like that, but it wasn't that fast or fundamental. Whereas, we know the algorithm can get changed on us any minute and some new platform can pop up or a new or a platform you've been using for a while adds a new format of how you're able to share a video on it. So I think you always have to stay sharp on what's going on there. And even when I look at a lot of my favorite brands and a lot of my favorite creators, they're doing different things on every platform. They're tweeting, they're tweeting certain ideas on Twitter. Obviously, they're putting like little vignettes of their life on Instagram. They're making more thoughtful videos on YouTube. So you can't have this mentality like, oh, we're going to make one piece of content and distribute it everywhere. Even though I think we all wish we could, because it would make our lives so much easier. But instead, you have to be thinking like, okay, I've got this story to tell, and I'm going to do it differently on all these different platforms and, let it out there to the world in different ways because there are different expectations and on every platform and different formats and different algorithms.
That's awesome. Yeah. So Greg, we've been doing so much of the talking so far. So now we want to open it up to our audience. This is your chance to speak directly with Greg, ask him any of your burning questions. We're going to transition to the Q&A portion of our webinar. So just a friendly reminder, drop us your questions at that Q&A on the bottom of your screen. And I'll kick us off. We have a really interesting audience question here. It's a little bit of a longer one, but I think it gets at something that I'm really curious to hear your answer on. So this audience member wanted to ask about consumer preferences regarding length of videos. So they say, we saw the rise and fall of Quibi and its focus on quick bite content of 10 minutes or less that didn't seem to stick well with consumers. We also noticed TikTok recently adding in a feature for 3-minute long videos, and that platform is seeing a lot of engagement with that length. Conversely, we're also seeing long-term content take off with Netflix and Disney Plus TV show viewership numbers rising consistently. The question I have is, what trends are you seeing regarding length and consumer preferences? Are there patterns developing? Do video length preferences vary based on age group or other factors?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's opportunity really in across age groups, demographics, and as long as there's been internet video. I mean, early on there were constraints on how long a video could be with bandwidth and people not wanting to be in front of their computers too long. But we now live in this world where it's easy to watch a longer video on your iPhone, or pretty quickly you can pop that video from your iPhone to your Roku or Apple TV and be watching it on a screen, no different than you'd watch a movie on Netflix. So I think that there's really a span to go all over, where on one hand, we sometimes want those quick updates on Instagram or TikTok or these other story platforms where you're just going to get 20 seconds of someone's life here, a minute of what a brand wants to tell you there, to, of course, wanting to watch. I mean, the TV show, even though they're technically half an hour, when you're binging them, like when a season's dropped all at once, like they're really just putting out like a 20-hour piece of content that happens to just have like chapters every hour. So there's this huge span of time. And I think it's just a question of like, how much time does the story you want to tell justify? But I think that kind of range has gotten larger than ever of the story that you can tell, that there is kind of no constraints on how long it can be. And while everyone's locked down, you have this great opportunity too, where the amount of time people have to consume video content is at an all-time high. So I think if you ever wanted to experiment with longer content, now's your chance.
Yeah, I won't reveal my personal consumption rates, which I'm not proud of. But anyway, enough about me. Let's go to another question that we have from Fran, who is interested to hear what you think about the proposed breakup of Facebook.
I think it's about 5 years too late. You can debate if they should be allowed to have acquired Instagram when they did, and it's hard to imagine, like, looking back. I mean, everyone thought Zuckerberg was crazy at the time for spending over $1 billion on what was a 15-person company. And funny enough, actually, Instagram won a Shorty Award before Facebook acquired them. And we were talking to them. This was back when they were 13 people. We were talking to one of their employees. Their one employee who would talk to outside people, and they were interested in coming, but like, oh, they got something going on, so they'll shoot a video instead. So we actually have a video of the two Instagram co-founders. Like, it's a really ironically a really crappy video. Them both in production value wise, they're like both in an alley, like it's clearly shot in an iPhone, like accepting their Shorty Award. And then a week later, it's like, oh, they were acquired by Facebook for over $1 billion. So and if you look at some of the correspondence that came out of it, like they acquired Instagram really out of fear, because the conventional wisdom back then was that like social networks are fads. Everybody remembers how Friendster and MySpace completely blew up and lost all their value. and it was kind of assumed that Facebook would too. So, I mean, it was a savvy move. Justice Department approved it then. So I think this idea, I think you have to separate two things. Like, one is, are there a lot of problems with Facebook? And the answer is yes. I think it's a mammoth challenge to figure out how do you moderate content, control misinformation, and all that. And the second question is, would breaking things up make them better? But there's no, the two are really unrelated, because you look at smaller social networks like Twitter, and they have all the same challenges with dealing with all those. And you can imagine if Facebook were broken up into three different into Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, each one of them would have to still grapple with that exact same challenge. So I think it might be like a little misguided to go. I think I'm not defending Facebook, but I think even if you think Facebook is the worst thing in the world, and I think everybody agrees they have challenges, is going at it from the direction of breaking them up a better angle than going at it from a direction of holding them accountable in other ways?
That's a great point. We have another question, kind of switching topics, in terms of what you expect to see in the next fad of Shorty Awards winners. So are you expecting to see videos featuring people wearing masks, or an uptick in producers using family members as actors, whether they're willing or not willing?
That's a great question. We might have to have a whole policy on if you're allowed to use unwilling family members in a Shorty Award video, or maybe it's a separate category. But yeah, I think those are all great predictions, and baked into the question. I think, all the content that's going to come out since COVID, like, you have to acknowledge a new reality. It doesn't have to be about COVID, but it's got to be embracing the new technology. And I think from brands, it's going to, creators have been awesome in it and figuring out what to do. I think from brands, it's going to be an interesting shift where I think it's going to push everyone a lot more towards that kind of social good messaging that you all were pioneering back in 2017, because nobody wants to hear, hey, your product's a little bit cooler than your competitors. They want to hear the meaning behind it. They want to hear the message behind it. And then also it's going to be about how brands figured out, like, how do they alter their productions and their storytelling with all the constraints that we had this year, because they couldn't do the typical kind of activations they did. They couldn't count on the video around their Coachella activation being the cool thing that's going to get them over the line. So it's been a tough year for everybody, but I think it's going to make it an even more interesting celebration and body of work to look at, because it's going to be this kind of unprecedented group of content that where everybody had to deal with the exact same challenge. I think that's also like the thing that's hard to understate about this is that in past, there have been huge challenges we've all had to grapple with. I live in New York. There was Hurricane Sandy where we didn't have power, and 9/11, and other regions have had their own huge challenges. But it was always regional. It's always like, okay, this region experienced this challenge, and maybe even there was a period where globally everybody tried to show solidarity and support. But there was never something where it's like, oh, everyone globally has gone through the exact same challenge at the exact same time. I think that'll make this year's Shorty really interesting, because it's a global competition. People enter from all over the world. And the fact that, like, everybody all over the world had to go through the exact same challenge is going to make for some really interesting considerations as we go through the judging process and figure out, okay, what did we take away from the last year, and what does it mean to have created great content over that year?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so fascinating about this moment that we're all living in, and the kind of content that we're seeing is like people at all corners of the earth are relating to things that we might not have been before, but shifting gears here a little bit, we've talked about video storytelling. We've talked a little bit about virtual events, and I'm wondering if you can talk to us about what it's like planning an event and what kind of storytelling elements go into that. Because I think we're still locked into being virtual for a while. So I'm wondering like if you can give us some of your insider tips on the storytelling and making an event dynamic and interesting, even virtually.
Sure. Yeah. It was a wild experience for us because we had about 2 months to pivot. Our award show typically is in late April, early May. And so we had to make that call like 2 months out. I mean, it ended up being impossible to, even if we did want to do the show, we maybe made the call ourselves a month before or a week before. It would have been obvious it would have been canceled anyhow. But we were had to pivot doing this large in-person show to being a virtual show. We got JB Smoove to host it, who plays, for anyone out there, he's a Curb Your Enthusiasm fan. He plays Leon on Curb. Extremely talented comedian in his own right. But he was he's lives in LA and he's been in the LA system. He never had to shoot his own content before. So it was wild working with him. We came with bits that he could shoot all on his own. He had to borrow his wife's computer. There was actually one moment where he needed some piece of equipment, so he arranged it. So he himself drove to Best Buy, and Best Buy brought the I forget what it was, but whatever the piece of equipment was, to his car just to hand it to him wearing a mask, and then he drove off. So that's the kind of stuff you have to do now. I mean, it's gotten we've all learned to adapt more since then, but it requires a lot of creativity, a lot of thinking within those constraints. Then with our more recent show, though, the Social Good Show, which as an in-person show would have been a smaller event, we did that one using an interactive platform so that you could chat with so that the attendees could chat with each other. They could move around to different rooms. There were various forms of entertainment. We had a magician or I think he was technically a mentalist, but doing some fun tricks over Zoom. So it was interactive, and then we wove him into the intro of the show. So there was like that kind of continuity and storytelling of it. So I really think we're just scratching the surface on what's possible with web video. There's so much opportunity to get interactive. We're still using all these platforms, even Zoom, that were conceived of pre-pandemic. They never thought that they'd be, I'm sure Zoom never thought they'd be hosting family reunions and weddings. Like they thought they'd just be there for webinars and for your staff meetings. So there's a ton of opportunity to figure out like, how do we do more on these platforms and really engage people while we're all cordoned off separate from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we all know the two top words, or anyway in my mind, for 2020 is pivot, adapt, and then pivot, adapt again. And yeah, so Zoom's probably real happy right now about what they've developed and how they've continued to push it out. But we're actually rounding down to the end of our hour together. Time flies when you're having fun. And certainly our time with you, Greg, has been tons of fun and extremely informative and valuable. I know everyone who's tuned in, we want to extend our thanks to you for spending an hour with us, and also remind you that the good news is if you missed a little part of this, or you have someone who you work with, or who would find value in this recording, it will be sent out to you a post-webinar. And just a reminder, talking about pivot and adaptive, that is our middle names here at Greenbuzz. We are here for you in 2021 if you're looking for video production, marketing, and any campaign needs. As you can tell, and I can say this without bragging too much, the video we shared with you today that was a finalist of the Shorty Award was done before I worked here. So I was impressed with it before. I'm still impressed with it. But if you're looking for great storytelling that's connective, we'd love to help you with that. and we're friends with Greg, so he gives us insider knowledge whenever we need it. So make sure if you have any of those needs looking forward to 2021, you reach out to us or at the email address info@greenbuzzagency.com. And also, we'll have lots of great guests coming up in the new year, people who have the chops that Greg does and the insight that you'll need. So stay tuned for our 2021 webinar series calendar. And last but certainly not least, I know Rachel and Amelia join me in this along with all our guests. A huge thanks to Greg for taking the time, giving us something to take away, or many things to take away, and a chance to have some human connection via Zoom that is both enjoyable but also informative. So our thanks to you, Greg, for spending this hour with us.
Rachel, Amelia, thanks so much for having me on. This was a blast.
Thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Any excuse I have to nuzzle up next to the fire, I will take.
I know. Greg brought his A game. He has the fireplace. We learned something even in that front for the next time we do a fireside chat. So our thanks to everyone who joined us, and please stay safe and happy holidays to everybody.